They pulled the cot from under him at 9:22 on a Wednesday morning and told him there was no record of his admission. The ward sister did not look at his face when she said it. She looked at the clipboard, then at the wall behind him, then at the door. Her name tag read Senior Patients Antwi, and she had a green pen tucked behind her left ear, and she had been working this ward for 11 years, and in all 11 of those years she had never once looked at a man the way she looked at Sergeant Major Kofi Antwi Mensah, which was to say she had never once looked at him at all. He was 71 years old. He weighed 58 kilograms, which was 11 kilograms less than he had weighed on the morning of his discharge from the Ghana Armed Forces 31 years ago, when he had stood in a parade ground in Accra in full uniform and saluted a flag and meant every degree of that salute. He was wearing brown trousers that he had ironed himself that morning at 5:47 a.m., and a white shirt with a small Ghana flag pin on the left breast pocket, the pin he wore every day, the pin his wife Amma had given him on the morning of their 3rd anniversary, which was also the morning he left for his 2nd tour. She had pressed it into his palm and said nothing. He had worn it every day since. The shirt was clean. The trousers were pressed. He had walked into that hospital the way he had always moved through the world, slowly, precisely, like a man who had learned that the body was a uniform and you kept it presentable. His left knee had been replaced in 2019 at a military hospital in Kumasi. The replacement had not held. He had known for 6 weeks that something was wrong, a grinding that began at the top of the stairs and did not stop until he was flat on his back. He had walked 4 blocks from the bus stop to get to this hospital, which was Kamfo Anokie Teaching Hospital in Kumasi, the largest referral facility in the Ashanti region, and the walk had taken him 34 minutes. Because of the grinding, because the pavement on the 2nd block had a crack that caught the rubber tip of his cane. He had not complained about any of it to the intake nurse. He had handed her his papers, his military pension identification, and the referral letter from his general practitioner, and he had thanked her for her time. The woman at intake had been distracted by something on her telephone. She had taken his papers without looking at them and told him to sit in row C. That had been at 7:15 in the morning. He had sat in row C for 2 hours and 11 minutes before a younger nurse had told him there was a bed available in Ward 4B. He had stood up from that row C chair slowly because his knee required slow rises and he had not made a sound. He had followed the young nurse to 4B. He had set his cane against the frame of the cot and his small bag of personal things on the floor beside it, and he had not been given any water or any form and had not seen a doctor, and that was fine. He had been patient in more difficult places than this, and he had waited. At 9:22, the ward sister arrived and said there was no record of him. He told her his name, Kofi Antwi Mensah. He told her the intake nurse had taken his paperwork. He told her the referral number on the letter from his GP was GH 2026 CUM 11174. He knew the number without checking because he had memorized it the night before in case something like this happened, though he had not truly believed something like this would happen. Senior Patients Antwi wrote something on her clipboard. She said the intake nurse had not completed the admission. She said without a completed admission, there was no bed assignment. She said he could return to outpatient and re-register. She said the word re-register the way people say words they use 20 times a day, without the understanding that for the man hearing it, this word represented 4 blocks in each direction on a knee that ground like a mortar and pestle. He set up his cane. He picked up his bag. He walked back down the corridor of Ward 4B, and there was a window at the end of the corridor that faced the hospital courtyard, and the morning light came through it at an angle that made the linoleum floor look almost warm, and he walked toward that window the way he had walked toward many things in his life that required him to simply keep moving. A man named Emmanuel Osei was sitting on a bench in the outpatient waiting area. He was 34 years old and worked as an orderly on the surgical floor, and he had been eating his breakfast, rice and Contemeyer stew in a black container, when the old man in the pressed shirt came through the outpatient door the second time, walking slowly and not complaining, and something in the way the old man sat down made Emmanuel set his container on the bench beside him and watch. He watched for 7 minutes. He watched the old man take his referral papers from his bag and place them on his knee with both hands flat on top of them. The way you hold something you have already been told does not matter. He watched the old man look at the floor. He watched the old man not look around for help, Not flag anyone down, not raise his voice. He just sat. Emmanuel Osei had been working in that hospital for 5 years, and in those 5 years he had seen people cry, people shout, people collapse on the floor, people call people on their phones, and hand the phone to the receptionist demanding to speak to a supervisor. He had never seen anyone sit the way this old man sat, with that particular stillness that was not resignation. That was something older and harder than resignation. That was a man who had been in worse places than this and had not broken and was not going to break in a hospital waiting room either. Emmanuel Osei walked over and crouched down in front of the bench. He said his name and asked what had happened. The old man told him quietly, in the same tone he had used with the ward sister, no heat, no performance, just the sequence of events in order. Intro C4B, the ward sister, the re-registration. Emmanuel asked to see the referral letter. He read it. He turned it over. He looked at the military pension ID. He looked at the Ghana flag pin on the left breast pocket of the man's shirt. He handed the papers back. He said he would be back in 4 minutes. He was back in 3. He did not get the old man a bed. He did not have the authority for that. What he did was bring a cup of water and a chair with armrests, which he placed beside the bench, and he helped the old man move to the chair so that he could extend his left leg, and he set the cane where the old man could reach it, and he said he was going to speak to the duty administrator. The old man said thank you. Emmanuel noticed that the old man said it the way people say thank you for things that are actually small, genuinely, completely, without inflation, the way people say thank you who have learned not to expect more than small things. The duty administrator was a man named Kenneth Osibansu, and he was filling in for the normal administrator who was at a conference in Accra, and he had been in his temporary office for 40 minutes when Emmanuel knocked and entered and explained the situation. Kenneth Osibansu listened. He pulled up the admissions record on his computer. He found the entry. There was an entry. The intake nurse had started it and not completed it, which was an intake error, not a non-admission, which meant technically the patient had been abandoned mid-process, not turned away, which was a different category of problem. He told Emmanuel he would look into it after the 10 o'clock administrative meeting. He said it without looking away from his computer. Emmanuel closed the office door behind him. He stood in the corridor for a moment. He thought about what he had seen in the old man's hands, the particular flatness of them on top of those papers. He took his phone from his pocket. He had a cousin who had done national service and who was still connected to people in the military, and he called that cousin and described the situation and asked if there was anyone who could be contacted, not to cause trouble, just to help an old man navigate the paperwork. His cousin said he would ask around. Emmanuel went back to his work. He changed 2 bed sheets. He moved a supply cart. He answered a call to Ward 3. He did not know what would happen. He had done what he could with what he had, and the rest was beyond him. But the rest, as it turned out, was already in motion. If you can feel where this is going, stay with me. Because what arrives at that hospital the next morning is not what anyone in that building was expecting. Major General Kwadwo Owusu-Boateng had been retired from active service for 4 years, but he still woke at 5 a.m., and he still made his bed with corners that could pass inspection. And he still drank his tea standing at the window rather than sitting, because sitting in the morning was a habit he had never acquired. He was 64 years old. He was 183 centimeters. He had a face that had been described in a profile in a Ghanaian military publication as resembling a man in permanent conversation with a difficult problem, which was accurate. He drove a gray 2019 Land Cruiser with 187,000 kilometers on it, which he drove himself. He had never owned a vehicle with personalized plates. He considered personalized plates a form of announcement, and he did not announce himself. He had received the message through 3 intermediaries by 8 the previous evening. By 8/7 he had confirmed the name Kofi Antwi Mensah, Sergeant Major, 2nd Infantry Battalion, retired 1995, 2 commendations for conduct under fire, 1 for meritorious service in the northern region in 1992, during the conflict that nobody had written enough about and that most people under 40 had forgotten. By 8:15, he had put his cup down and made a call. The person he called answered before the second ring. The general did not say much on the call. He said the name. He said the situation. He said one more thing, and then he said he would be there at 9. And he hung up. He arrived at Kamfo Anoki Teaching Hospital at 8:54 a.m. on Thursday. He parked in the regular visitor area not the administrative section. He walked through the main entrance without stopping at the information desk. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark trousers, a plain white shirt, leather shoes. He was not in uniform. He had not worn his uniform to make this point. He carried nothing except his phone and his wallet and a folded sheet of paper in his breast pocket. The outpatient section of that hospital had 47 people in it when he walked through. 14 of those 47 people looked up when he entered, though they could not have said precisely why. He moved the way people move who have spent decades in environments where a wrong step cost more than embarrassment. He stopped at the reception window. The receptionist was a young woman named Grace. She was 26 years old and had been working at that desk for 8 months, and she had developed a very efficient way of not making eye contact with people as they approached, which was a coping mechanism for a desk that processed 140 intake requests on a slow day. She heard him approach. She did not look up immediately. When she did look up, she found a man looking at her with an expression that was not impatient, not demanding, not aggressive. It was simply focused in a way that required her full attention in the same way a stopped clock requires your full attention. He told her his name. He told her he was there to see the duty administrator and the chief medical officer regarding an admission matter from the previous day. He told her the patient's name. He said it clearly, and he said it only once. Grace picked up her phone and dialed. Kenneth Osibansu came out of his office 2 minutes later. He was 42 years old, and he had a good read on situations, which was how he had made it to administration. And the read he was getting off the man standing at the reception window was not a read he could easily categorize. He introduced himself. He extended his hand. The general shook it. He said his name. He said his former rank. He said he was there about Sergeant Major Kofi Antwi-Mensah and the interrupted admission from the previous day. Kenneth Osibansu's hand came back to his side. He said he had been looking into that matter. He said he had intended to resolve it that morning. His voice had the specific quality of a man explaining something true that has become less true in the process of being delayed. The general said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Where is he now?" It was not a question the way questions are usually formed. There was no inflection that suggested he would accept an uncertain answer. Kenneth Osibansu said Sergeant Major Antwi-Mensah had been seen by a junior doctor that morning, an outpatient, and there was a bed being arranged. He said it without quite meeting the general's eyes. The general said, "I would like to see him." He was taken to the ward. He walked through 2 sets of doors and down a corridor where the nurses they passed straightened without being spoken to, not because they knew who he was, but because the body learns certain signals and responds to them before the brain catches up. The junior doctor who had seen the sergeant major that morning appeared at the entrance to Ward 4B with a speed that suggested someone had already made a call ahead. Sergeant Major Kofi Antwi-Mensah was in a bed by the window. He had been placed there 40 minutes ago. His left leg was elevated on a pillow. He had been given water. He had not yet been given a proper assessment because the orthopedic consultant was not due until the following morning, which was a further problem that would need addressing. He was looking at the ceiling when the door opened, and then he heard a footstep he had not heard in a long time, that particular cadence, that particular weight distribution, and he turned his head. The general stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at the old soldier for a long moment without speaking. He looked at the flag pin on the white shirt, which was hanging on the hook beside the bed, still pressed, still clean. He pulled the chair from against the wall and sat down. Not the chair of a visitor who has somewhere else to be, the chair of someone who has nowhere more important to be than here. He said, "Kofi." The old man said, "Sir." The general said, "I heard what they did." The sergeant major looked at him. He did not say it was fine. He did not say it was nothing. He did not perform forgiveness. He said, "How did you know?" The general said a young man with a phone had been paying attention. There was a silence. The morning light through the window was the same light that came through every hospital window in every hospital in the world. Institutional, indifferent, the kind of light that does not care what has happened in the room. But it came through at an angle that caught the flag pin on the hanging shirt and held it for a moment. The general took the folded sheet of paper from his breast pocket. He placed it on the bedside table without ceremony. He said the orthopedic department head would be visiting that afternoon rather than the following morning. He said the hospital board had received a letter that morning with his signature and the signatures of 3 others. requesting a formal review of intake procedures for military veteran patients, specifically around the completion of admission records. He said the review would begin within the week, and its findings would be implemented within 30 days, overseen by a committee that included his name. He did not say this to impress the old man. He said it the way you tell someone the practical facts of what has been put in motion, as information, not performance. The sergeant major looked at the folded sheet on the table. He did not pick it up. He said, "They were just following their system." The general said, "Then the system needs to be different." Senior patient Antwi, who had told the old man to go back to outpatient the previous morning without looking at his face, was called to a meeting with the chief medical officer at Tumai that afternoon. She was not disciplined. She was shown the intake error, the sequence of events, and the letter. She was asked to participate in a working group on veteran admission procedures. She said yes. She was not the villain of this story. She was the face of a system that had stopped seeing the people inside it, which is a different problem and a harder one to fix, but not an unfixable one. Kenneth Osi Bonsu stayed late that evening completing the documentation. He thought about the 7 minutes between when the report crossed his desk and when he had said he would look into it after the 10 o'clock meeting. He thought about what happens inside those 7 minutes, how a person decides, without deciding, that something can wait. He thought about the old man's hands flat on those papers. He did not know if he would have made a different choice if he had thought about those hands at the time. He did not know if knowing this about himself would make him a different administrator going forward. He intended to find out. Emmanuel Osei heard what had happened through the hospital, the way things travel through hospitals, quickly, in pieces, in the spaces between other tasks. He was in the middle of changing a bedsheet on the 4th floor when a colleague told him a general had come in that morning because of the old veteran. He finished the bedsheet before he allowed himself to think about it. When he did think about it, standing in the corridor with the folded sheet in his hands, he thought about something his mother had said to him when he was 9 years old, that the difference between a witness and a bystander is not what you see, but what you do with what you have seen. He had done what he had with what he had. He had 3 minutes, a cup of water, an armchair, and a cousin with a phone. That had been enough. He did not think of himself as having done something significant. He thought of it the way you think of having done what you were supposed to do, which is without particular pride, but also without regret. The orthopedic consultant reviewed Sergeant Major Kofi Antwi Mensah at 4:15 that afternoon. The original knee replacement had developed component loosening, which was a known complication of that procedure in patients with the old man's bone density, and it was correctable, and it had been caught before it became something worse. The corrective procedure was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The sergeant major was told this by a doctor who sat beside the bed, not above it, and who used his name, Kofi, not the patient, not sir, and looked at him when he spoke. He was given dinner that evening in the ward. Jollof rice and fried plantain, which he had not specifically requested, but which the kitchen had sent up on a note from someone whose name he was not told. He ate it slowly and completely. He set the tray aside with both hands, the way he set everything aside, with the same attention he gave to things he was putting down. He took the flag pin from the pocket of his hanging shirt. He held it in his palm for a moment. He had worn it every day for 41 years, and in those 41 years he had set it down in rooms in 3 countries on 2 continents, and in a tent in the northern region in 1992, where the night was cold enough to see your breath, and the pin had caught the light from a lamp in a way that made him think of Amma, and the morning she had pressed it into his hand. He had never lost it. He had never left a place without it. He set it on the bedside table where he could see it from the pillow, and he lay back and looked at the ceiling, and the grinding in his left knee was the same as it had been, but now it had a name and a day and a plan, and those 3 things together change what pain means. The world does not always recognize what it is standing in the presence of. It looks at a brown uniform and dirty shoes and a plastic bag, and it sees a cost, a problem, a form to be redirected. It does not think about what it took to press those trousers at 5:47 in the morning. It does not think about what kind of man wears a small flag pin every day for 41 years and still means it. It does not think about the particular quality of a stillness that has been tested by things it never had to face. But there are people who recognize it. They are not always the ones with authority. Sometimes they are the ones eating breakfast on a bench who look up at the wrong moment and see something true. The recognition is not complicated. It does not require a title or a form or a policy. It requires only the willingness to crouch down in front of a bench and ask what happened. You cannot take 31 years of service from a man by losing his paperwork. You cannot undo what a person carries by handing them the wrong chair in the wrong corridor. You cannot make a man invisible who has spent his life standing where others would not stand. What those systems can do, the only thing they can actually do, is create the delay between when a person is seen and when the world adjusts itself to that fact. The adjustment always comes. The only variable is how long the delay runs, and how many people with a phone and a cousin and 3 minutes are paying attention in the room. He had served 31 years. He had come home and pressed his trousers and worn his pin every day. He had walked 4 blocks on a knee that ground like gravel. He had sat in row C for 2 hours and 11 minutes without raising his voice. He had not needed to be spectacular. He had needed to be seen. By Tuesday morning, he was subscribed for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. And before you go, I want to ask you something real. If you had been in that hospital waiting area and you watched an old man in a pressed shirt sit in silence for 2 hours with his papers flat under his hands, would you have been the one to crouch down and ask, or would you have been the one who looked away? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. I'll see you in the next one.